What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Hoops and Stuff podcast. I'm your host, Isaac, and today we're going to be talking about the 2023 NBA draft. It was a great draft, and there's some really talented people picked in this draft, and I'm really excited to talk about this because this is one of my favorite recent draft classes, I'd say. To start off, obviously, we've seen the Spurs pick center Victor Wembanyama from the Metropolitans 92 from France, and he is one of the biggest prospects coming into the league since LeBron James, and it's just insane how such a tall player can actually play like that, because obviously we see a lot of taller players get really bad injuries in their career. And I mean, obviously, it's just the beginning of his career, but he played 3 years overseas. Or he played quite a few seasons overseas, but he played for 3 years. He played from 2019 to 2023. His first season overseas in France, or overseas, I don't think it was in France, but his first season overseas, he didn't average any points, 0 points. And then the second season, he still only averaged 1.3. And then his next season was in France, and he only averaged 6.8. Then his next season wasn't in France, and it was 6.5. And then the next season was in France, and he averaged 9.4, which, I mean, obviously is solid, but not the Victor Wembanyama that we've heard of. And then in his most recent season, it was his first season with the Metropolitans, and he had 21.6 points. That's what he was averaging. So, I mean, obviously a really solid player with 3 blocks per game. I mean, he's insane. He's over 7 foot. He's 7 foot. They have him listed at 7'2", but I'm pretty sure he's 7'4" or 7'5", which is insane. And I feel like he just fits perfectly with that San Antonio roster, because they're full of young players. They have players in their starting lineup like Trey Jones, Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sochan, and now obviously Victor Wembanyama. They have Keldon Johnson, who is in his mid to late 20s. And then off the bench, they have Devontae Graham, who, I mean, he's not super old, but he's not super young. He's got some talent. And they have Zach Collins off their bench. And they have some decent players. And I think that if they can get a couple more solid pieces, that this is a really good contender in the playoffs. Because obviously Victor Wembanyama, as long as he stays healthy, he's gonna have you going that team's gonna go crazy. Whatever team he's on, they're gonna go crazy. And I mean, he's not much of a passer, but obviously he's a big man. Not a lot of big men are great passers. I mean, we have Jokic, but not a lot of big men are gonna average more than maybe 5, 8, maybe 7 assists, because big men are more of rebounders and they can score in the paint, obviously. And Victor Wembanyama can score from really anywhere. He can shoot, he can drive, he can really just do anything you need him to. And like I said, I definitely think he's going to be a great fit for this Spurs team. Alright, our next player is going to be Brandon Miller, who was obviously drafted at number 2 to the Hornets, and he is a small forward from Alabama. And Brandon Miller seems like he's going to be a really great pick for the Hornets, especially with what they need. I mean, technically he's a small forward, but on the depth chart for the Hornets, we do see him at the 2 guard playing shooting guard, but I do believe that's going to be because the Hornets extended a qualifying offer to Miles Bridges. So Miles Bridges will probably be returning to the Hornets this season. and I'm going to assume that they're going to run him at the small forward. So then they'll have LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges, P.J. Washington, Mark Williams, which, I mean, Brandon Miller is a great fit in that lineup, and I really like that because Brandon Miller to go along with another young guard like LaMelo Ball is really good for the Hornets and also really good for Brandon Miller because we see a lot of these young players get drafted to bad teams like they have to like rebuild around the young player, and it takes them a couple of years. But this team was only bad because LaMelo Ball was hurt for quite a bit last year. So obviously if you don't have your star player, you're not going to be as good as you usually are. But if LaMelo Ball could stay healthy, him and Brandon Miller could be a really good duo, and I feel like they can make a pretty good playoff run. But like I said, that's if LaMelo Ball stays healthy. Brandon Miller, who averaged nearly 19 points in college at Alabama, he also averaged 8.2 rebounds and 2.1 assists. So again, we don't have a big passer in Brandon Miller, and obviously it was the same with Wembanyama. We don't have any great passers with the first two picks, but we have some scorers and rebounders. And Brandon Miller, he can throw it down. He can get to the rim and just give you a nice dunk. He's a solid player. I mean, if you're running him at shooting guard, he's a little big. He's 6'9". Yeah, 6'9". But I think that they could definitely end up running him at the small forward and then running Miles Bridges at the power forward over P.J. Washington. But it really all depends on what they want to do. I mean, obviously we do see a lot of tall guards in today's game, and maybe that's what will end up happening with Brandon Miller. Maybe he will be another one of those tall guards. And I mean, honestly, it's not a bad idea because like Brandon Miller, he could be part of that new generation of guards, because I feel like there's a new generation of guards who they're really good at finishing. Like we've seen a lot of guards recently, like Ja Morant and players like that who are really good at finishing. And obviously can shoot a little bit, but they're more of a finisher. And we have seen a lot of bigger guards coming into the league in the last decade, I'd say. So he definitely fits the guard, the newer guards, I'd say, because he has that height and he has the same kind of skill as the modern guard, I'd say. With the third pick, we've seen the Portland Trailblazers. I'd say they picked an interesting pick, but it was the obvious pick. We've seen them pick point guard Scoot Henderson out of the G League team Ignite, which obviously we have seen a lot of players going into the G League and going to Ignite and then being drafted out of the G League. And obviously we started to see that more because obviously the G League is quite new, I'd say. It's newer to the NBA. And we've seen Scoot Henderson go number 3. He's a very talented player. I'd compare him to somebody like Ja Morant, who is a smaller point guard but has the hops and finishes like Zion Williamson. Scoot Henderson is an amazing player, and for the Trailblazers, they're going to have to make a really hard decision to let Damian Lillard go, and with letting him go, I mean, they're going to have to trade him. And for the Portland Trailblazers, I mean, Damian Lillard has obviously been one of their biggest contributions over the last 10 years. He's a great player, not solid, but he's a great player. And obviously, Dame is one of the better shooters of all time. He's a NBA top 75 player, and it's really hard to let go of somebody who has contributed to your franchise like that, but that shows you what kind of talent Scoot Henderson has. If the Portland Trailblazers are willing to give up a player who has contributed to their team and their legacy as much as Damian Lillard has, then you're definitely getting a really good player out of Scoot Henderson. And I'm really excited to watch him. I mean, obviously, right now they have Dame, they have Anthony Simons in the starting lineup. They're going to have Shaedon Sharpe at their small forward. They have Jeremy Grant at their power forward, and then they'll have Yusuf Nurkic at center. And obviously then they'll end up trading away Dame eventually, and they're going to run Scoot Henderson at the point. That is the plan, and there's been tons and tons of talks about where Damian Lillard will end up. The Miami Heat are an option. The Brooklyn Nets are an option. So we don't know on Damian Lillard yet where he'll end up. And whoever ends up with Damian Lillard, they're going to have a great player, a great shooter. And I'm really excited to see him move, because obviously we always want to see players move. And I think that they should definitely try to get a solid trade package. We've seen a lot of people, like the Hawks ended up trading away John Collins for basically nothing. So some players who are talented, you don't always get a good trade package for, but I think that Damian Lillard will definitely bring them in quite a few great players and definitely some picks. And I think this team is going to be really good. And I mean, obviously they didn't have a great season last year because Damian Lillard was out for quite a bit with that stomach injury. But I think that they should definitely try to get a new player to replace Yusuf Nurkic and put him alongside Scoot Henderson, somebody who's going to fit in with Scoot Henderson's play style. And I feel like Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson are both very comparable players with their insane athletic abilities. They can both dunk the ball like very well. They're both great finishers, and they're both young, obviously. Shaedon Sharpe is more of like a shooting guard, small forward, and Scoot Henderson is a point guard. But I mean, and then they'll have Anthony Simons to go along with those two, so that's a solid three right there. I mean, obviously you have Damian Lillard right now too, and I feel like the Portland Trailblazers are just stacked, to be honest. And I'm really excited to see this team perform. The fourth pick was Amen Thompson from Overtime Elite. He's listed as a point guard, but the Rockets drafted him out of Overtime Elite. He is 6'7", and I think that he's gonna be a really solid player. His twin brother was also drafted in this draft, and we're gonna talk about him next. But he was drafted to the Rockets, who obviously have had quite a few young picks within the last couple of years, just because obviously they're not a great team, so they get a lot of high picks, and he was one of those high picks. And looking at the depth chart for them, they have him starting at the 3, which, I mean, that does work because he's, like I said, he's 6'7", so he can play the 3 for you, and it could still work. But they have Kevin Porter Jr. at their starting point guard, Jalen Green at their starting shooting guard, and then Amen Thompson at their starting small forward, and Jabari Smith Jr. at their starting power forward, and Alperen Şengün at their starting center. Very young team. And they have another pick that we're going to talk about later into the episode. But like I said, Amen is going to be a really solid player for the Rockets, and he fits in with the Houston Rockets like roster, I'd say. And he fits like right in with the lineup because I feel like he's definitely what they needed to push them over the edge from an okay team to a good team. And I think that within the next couple of years they could make a solid playoff run. Our next player that we're going to be talking about is Ausar Thompson, who is obviously Amen Thompson's twin brother, and they both played for Overtime Elite, which is a newer thing, and I believe they are the first players to come out of Overtime Elite, which is the abbreviation for it is OTE. So I'm pretty sure these are the first two players to come out of OTE. I don't think there's any from last year. So I think that these two could, if either one of them are good, they're obviously going to make history because they are the first players out of OTE to actually play in the NBA. And I mean, neither brother is bad at all. I mean, they're both like 6'7". Ausar was drafted to the Pistons with the 5th pick, and they are starting him at small forward, it looks like, as their depth is Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Ausar Thompson, Bojan Bogdanovic, and James Wiseman. So they're definitely going to have a solid starting five, a very young team, and he is obviously another young player that they're going to add to that team. And after he develops, he could be an amazing player. Amen is supposed to be better than Ausar though, so I don't know. Maybe he could prove the haters wrong, I guess, but I don't know. It's gonna be really hard because they're like the same. They're the same person, and you really can't I don't know. You can't really judge somebody's talent when the other person is like the same exact person. So I think that these two twins are going to be I think they're going to be a really good set of twins in the NBA. I mean, obviously we've seen the Morris brothers get drafted back to back in like 2012 or something like that. So here we have another set of brothers who were drafted back to back, and they're both really solid players. I really like Ausar and Amen. Next up, we've seen the 6th pick go to the Magic, who drafted shooting guard Anthony Black from Arkansas. And Anthony Black averaged 13 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists at Arkansas in his one season that he played there. And so we've seen him go to another, I'd say, a pretty young team with the the Orlando Magic, sorry. I mean, like last year they just drafted Paolo Banchero, and they have Bol, they have Franz Wagner, so, and they have Markelle Fultz, who I guess is pretty young, but he's not super young. He's like mid to late 20s, so he's pretty young still. And I mean, they have Cole Anthony and they have Jalen Suggs. So this is a pretty good team. And they also had the 11th pick, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So I think that Anthony Black could definitely be a good player, but I think that I don't think he's going to be a top 5 player in this draft. I think he's a mid player, and I think that there's definitely better players that they could have picked over him, but he might be good. I don't know. But I think they'll definitely have a better chance with somebody else. And honestly, a person who plays the same position as him, who I think they could have taken, who was taken later in the draft, Grady Dick. I really like Grady Dick. He looks like an amazing player. So we'll get to him in a little bit, obviously. But right now, we just want to focus on Anthony Black, and I think that he was taken a little high. He was overhyped. Next up, with the 7th pick, the Pacers picked Bilal Coulibaly. And Bilal Coulibaly is a player from overseas who played on the same team as Victor Wembanyama. He played for the Metropolitans 92, and he was traded to the Wizards. So the Wizards ended up with Bilal Coulibaly, and the Wizards are in a rebuilding state right now. I mean, they just traded away their franchise player and Bradley Beal. So they're definitely gonna be rebuilding for quite a bit here. I mean, they ended up getting Jordan Poole back. So I mean, you have another young player, but I think Bilal, like, I seen Bilal Coulibaly was like he was like hyped up like in his very last season. Like, he might have just had like a lucky year. I mean, I think he seemed pretty good, and I think he could definitely fit in with this Washington roster. But he is a small forward, so it really depends on what position they want to play Kyle Kuzma at, because if you play, they could run it. They could run it. Tyus Jones at point guard, Jordan Poole shooting guard, Bilal Coulibaly at small forward, and then Kyle Kuzma at power forward and Daniel Gafford at center. Or they could run Corey Kispert and put Bilal Coulibaly on the bench. Or they might end up running Kyle Kuzma at the small forward and end up having Bilal Coulibaly on the bench. So Bilal Coulibaly definitely has a questionable future, but like he was already moved by the Pacers to the Wizards on draft night, so he had a pretty interesting night, I guess. The next pick was by the Wizards, and they drafted power forward Jarace Walker, and they traded him to the Pacers for Bilal Coulibaly. And Jarace Walker is out of Houston, and Jarace Walker, so he's going to the Pacers, and Pacers did, I don't want to spoil it for next video, but I mean, everybody's obviously going to see, they did just pick up Bruce Brown. So, I mean, they don't really need him, but they could run him off their bench if they want to, or they could run him at a different position. He's been hyped up. He looks like a solid player. Jarace Walker. There's a lot of big men in this draft class too, so like a lot of the players are like, I'd say like small forwards, but they could be power forwards. And with the 6'8" build that Jarace Walker has, you could run him at the small forward if you want to, but power forward is technically his listed position for this Indiana Pacers team. And like I said, they just grabbed Bruce Brown out of free agency, so, and it looks like they're going to be running Bruce at the shooting guard. But I mean, you could really run Bruce Brown anywhere, because I mean, he's like the right height to run him anywhere. He is. Oh, he's only 6'4". I thought he was taller than 6'4". So I guess that works out fine then. And honestly, this Pacers team is looking good. Tyrese Maxey, Bruce Brown, Buddy Hield, Jarace Walker, Miles Turner. I think they'll end up trading Miles Turner this year, but still, they're looking like a solid team. And Jarace Walker just adds to that, and I think he's definitely going to be a great player if he sticks with this Pacers team. They have a couple of good young pieces. He averaged 11 points at Houston and 7 rebounds, so he can get you some rebounds and only 2 assists. But I mean, he's got a 35% three, not terrible. 46 blocks in his high school or in his his college career, and 35 steals. So I mean, not bad for his 1 year of college, and it'll definitely be interesting to see how good or bad he ends up turning out. But I think he'll definitely be a good player. With the 9th pick, we seen the Jazz draft power forward Taylor Hendricks out of UCF, and the Utah Jazz did just pick up John Collins in a trade. So I mean, they have power forwards, and I mean, you have players like Lauri Markkanen who do run small forward but could run power forward. I mean, Lauri Markkanen's 7 foot tall. Dude should be running center, but he does run small forward, some power forward, and I mean, Taylor Hendricks is 6'9", so I mean, if you really need him to, you could run center, but you do have Walker Kessler at center with this Jazz team, and I really like Taylor Hendricks, and this is another player that could have went higher in the draft than he did. He was the 15th, or he's not 15th, but he averaged 15 points at UCF, 7 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. So he's not much of a passer, but he did have nearly 60 blocks, and he had just over 30 steals in his 1 year of college, and he was a pretty efficient shooter, shooting nearly 40% from 3-point. And for a big, that's pretty solid for a big. So I really like the potential for Taylor Hendricks, especially with this Utah Jazz roster who have a lot of young, solid players. Like they have Colin Sexton and they have Walker Kessler, they have Lauri Markkanen. So they have some pretty solid players, and they have a vet like Jordan Clarkson. I mean, some people could consider Jordan Clarkson a vet. I'd say he's a vet. He's 31, so I'd say he has quite a bit of experience, and I think that he is definitely a vet, and he can get Taylor Hendricks used to that NBA life and like just help him through the beginning of his career. And I think that he'll definitely be set up to be a really great NBA player. The number 10 pick was belonging to the Mavericks, who drafted point guard Cason Wallace out of Kentucky, who was traded to the Thunder, and they just swapped the picks for the Mavericks got the 12th, the player who was picked 12th, and the Thunder got obviously Cason Wallace. And the Thunder have quite a few young good guards. They have Josh Giddey, who is obviously a great player. And now they have Cason Wallace, who is going to be coming off the bench behind Josh Giddey at shooting guard. And Cason Wallace is 6'4", so I mean, he could run some point if you need him to, but he is listed as a shooting guard. And at Kentucky, he averaged 12 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. So he can do more than just score, and he can do more than just like pass. He can do a little bit of everything. And I mean, it's not terrible, but I definitely don't think that he's he's obviously not the best player in this draft, but I think that he could be solid if he can get an actual chance. I mean, he's coming off the bench, so I don't know what to really expect from him. And especially on a team like this with all these young players, I mean, they have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who averages 30 points. Like, he averaged 30 points a game last year. They have Josh Giddey, who's young. He's gonna try to get some buckets, and he's gonna try to get better. They have Lu Dort, who is also another solid player. They have Jalen Williams, who everybody loves Jalen Williams. Both the Jalen Williams are both young, and they're both pretty solid players. And Chet Holmgren's supposed to be coming back this season. You never know, because I mean the dude's built like a stick, but he's supposed to be coming back this season. He's a young player. He's gonna want to get those buckets. So Cason Wallace is really gonna have to work for those buckets, and he's gonna have to work for his minutes. And he's not just gonna get those handed to him. He has to actually work for them, especially with the team that he's on, with all the young like stars that come off this team, because they have so many draft picks, and they're going to keep getting those young players from the other draft picks that they have. The 11th pick also belonged to the Orlando Magic, who also had the 6th pick that we talked about earlier, who's Anthony Black. But this pick was another shooting guard, and it was Jett Howard out of Michigan. But as the depth chart shows, they are going to be running him at the small forward off the bench, and right with Anthony Black. Anthony Black is the backup shooting guard, and Jett Howard looks like he's going to be the backup small forward. At Michigan, he averaged 14 points a game, but only had 2 assists and 3 rebounds. So he had some solid numbers. He's 6'8", which is a really good build for a small forward, pretty tall. And I think that he could definitely be a hooper for this young Magic team, but he's another player who's really going to have to work for his minutes, because they do have a lot of young players on their team. They have players like Paolo Banchero, they have players like Franz Wagner, and players who are just going to try to score, and they're going to try to work for themselves. And they have Bol, but it looks like he's in the 4th rotation off the bench, which is ridiculous, because Bol does have a lot of potential, I feel like, and I feel like if you give him some minutes, he'll be a solid player for you. I mean, they're starting Goga Batadze, I don't know how to say his name, and Moritz Wagner, so over Bol. So that's pretty sad, because Bol was in college supposed to be a really good player until he had a big injury, and it ruined his career. So Jett Howard, he really like earns those minutes, I guess, like, and he deserves those minutes because he put up some solid numbers in college, and honestly, I think that you could start him as shooting guard over Gary Harris. And I mean, obviously, he has to prove himself before he can get into the starting rotation, but I think that he could definitely end up in the starting rotation eventually. With the number 12 pick, the Thunder selected center Derek Lively II. I'm pretty sure that's how you say it, Lively. It's either Lively, Lively, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's Lively. And he is from Duke. He was traded to the Mavericks for Cason Wallace. And, I mean, not great numbers in his one season with Duke. I mean, 5 points, 5 rebounds, and an assist per game. Not a 3-point shooter by any means, and not too great with his free throws either. But he does have potential to become a better player, obviously, and maybe he'll do that on the Dallas Mavericks, or maybe he'll do it somewhere else. I'm looking at their depth chart on ESPN, and it doesn't show him anywhere on the depth chart, but I'm not sure what's going on with that and like why he's not on the team. But I guess we'll see what happens come this season. I mean, he's on the roster, he's just not on the depth chart, so we'll see what happens with that. Maybe we'll see some Derek Lively backup center play behind Christian Wood or Dwight Powell, or now who they have, Sean Holmes. But we'll have to wait to see this season. With the number 13 pick in the NBA draft, the Toronto Raptors selected shooting guard Grady Dick out of Kansas. And in my personal opinion, this is my most exciting pick of the draft. I mean, obviously we've seen Wembanyama, we've seen Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson, top 3 players in the draft, phenomenal players, but I am really excited to see Grady Dick play. He looks like a phenomenal player, and I mean, as of right now in their depth chart, they have him coming off the bench at their backup small forward, but I think that we could possibly see him running the point after they have just lost their starting point guard. And they brought in Dennis Schroeder, but I think that they should play Grady Dick at the point guard over Dennis Schroeder at the point guard. And like I said, he is a really exciting pick in my opinion, and I'm really excited to see him play. He was putting up 14 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists in Kansas, and he's one of my personal favorite players out of this draft, and I think that he fits perfect with what Toronto needs. They need a shooter, they need a guard, and he fits perfect for that role. He's going to be a lethal 3-point shooter for this team and around the league, honestly. Next up, with the 14th pick, we've seen the New Orleans Pelicans draft shooting guard Jordan Hawkins out of Connecticut. And for the Pelicans, Jordan Hawkins could be another solid young guard. I mean, they have players like Trey Murphy and Dyson Daniels who also play guard, and I think he's just going to add to that and give them another option. I mean, they have Jose Alvarado as well, who is pretty young, but they should have tried to, they could have tried to trade up and look for a power forward to replace Zion, because obviously we've seen Zion get many injuries throughout his career. I mean, he's maybe played 100 games. So they could have drafted somebody who could replace him, since they already have Trey Murphy, who they can run at their shooting guard. But Jordan Hawkins is also a solid pick. I mean, he's coming out of Connecticut. Forgot to mention that, but in his first year of college, he only averaged 6 points at UConn and 2 rebounds per game with a half assist. And the second season, he definitely stepped it up quite a bit, averaging 16, 4, and 1, which is pretty solid stats, especially for a shooting guard who's getting 4 rebounds per game. That's pretty solid, and I honestly think that he could be a pretty good pick for this team. I don't think that's exactly what they needed. I think they could have went with somebody who could actually fit what they needed instead. With the 15th pick, the Hawks drafted point guard Kobe Bufkin, and he is out of Michigan. And honestly, I guess this could mean that maybe they'll start relying on more than Trae Young at the point guard position. Maybe they'll rely more on Kobe Bufkin a little bit. But Kobe Bufkin is another 2-year college player. He played his first season in Michigan, averaging 3 points per game, 1 rebound, and basically no assists. And in his second season, he averaged 14 points with 4.5 total rebounds and 3 assists per game. So his stats definitely changed a lot between his first and second season, and he also got more playing time and played more games. So more minutes, more games, that's going to get you more points per game. And honestly, it's a good pick for the Hawks. I really like it, especially this deep into the draft. With the 16th pick, we see the Jazz pick up Keyonte George out of Baylor. And he is a shooting guard. And for this Jazz team, we have seen them obviously trade away Donovan Mitchell, who was their star guard, and trade away Mike Conley. So they traded away their two starting guards. But bringing Colin Sexton, I feel, really helped, especially with how young he still is. He can still develop more and become a great player. Jordan Clarkson obviously has a little more experience in the league. He's a little older, but he's still a great player. And at your shooting guard position, you have a solid player with him. So, I mean, Keyonte George is probably not going to be starting this season, but possibly next season he could take Jordan Clarkson's starting spot. And he's 6'4", so you could run him at the small forward if you needed to, but I mean, they already have Lauri Markkanen, and they'll probably just end up having him come off of the bench. I mean, they have Chris Dunn at their backup point guard, so Keyonte George possibly will get some backup point guard minutes. But I mean, with Baylor, he averaged 15 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, so he put up some pretty solid numbers, and we could definitely see him overtaking Jordan Clarkson as Jordan Clarkson gets older and Keyonte George moves into his prime years of his basketball career. With the 17th pick, the Lakers drafted point guard Jalen Hood-Schifino, and he is a player in this draft that I feel was very talked about, and a lot of people were looking forward to Jalen coming to the league. And honestly, I think this was a bad pick for the Lakers. I mean, not Jalen himself, but it just doesn't fit what they need. I mean, he was averaging 13.5, 4 in college at Indiana. So, I mean, he's a solid player, but they have too many guards on their team to really need him. So it's really hard to choose who you could play him over at this point with the amount of guards that they have. With the 18th pick, the Miami Heat selected Jaime Jaquez Jr. out of UCLA. He is listed as a small forward, and he's 6'7", so I mean, you could run him some power forward minutes, but I really do like this Jaime Jaquez guy. He looks like he is going to be a solid player for the Heat if they actually do play him. Obviously the Heat are a great team. They have some great players, so it's hard to get minutes on that team. You have to have some talent to get minutes for the Heat because they have multiple great players. And he is one of the older players coming out of the draft. He did play 4 years of college, but at UCLA, he averaged 9 points in his freshman year, 9 points, 5 rebounds, and then an assist and a half. And in his second season, he improved, averaging 12 points per game, 6 rebounds per game, and 2 assists per game. And in his third season, he got even better, averaging nearly 14 points per game 6 rebounds per game and 2 assists. So, and then in his third season, he did really good. 18 points per game, 8 rebounds, and 2.5 assists. So, with the 18th pick, that is honestly a steal for the Heat. And this guy's definitely going to have some talent. And I think the only reason he fell so far down in the draft is because he obviously, like I said, he's one of those older players. And, I mean, he's 22. So, I mean, he's obviously still going to have a lot of time in the NBA. He's going to play a lot of years, but you're not going to get that 20 years out of him. I mean, possibly 20 years, but you'll probably get like 15 to 17 years out of a player coming into the draft so late in their life, I guess you could say. Because a lot of players they'll do a one and done in college, and they'll only play 1 year, or some players play 2. And it's not very common to see a player play 4 years in college, but Jaime does look like a really good prospect for this Miami Heat team. Next up, we have the Warriors pick, and they had the 19th pick, and they drafted shooting guard Brandon Podziemski. Sorry, that took me a minute. But Brandon Podziemski, and he is a 6'5" shooting guard. And obviously, we just seen them lose Jordan Poole. So, this could be a good pick for them, but I mean, they have quite a bit of guards on their team, so he might not play as much this year just because of that factor that they have many guards and many solid guards at that. They have, I mean, obviously they have Curry, and Curry's one of the best point guards in the league, but I really do like this pick for the Warriors, especially as a Warriors fan. I do really like this pick, and I'm really excited to see what Podziemski can do. I mean, he was a 2-year player in college. He played at Illinois in his first season, and he was only getting 4 minutes per game and averaged 1.5 points, a rebound, and no assists. And then he transferred to Santa Clara for his second season of college at the age of 19, and he was getting 36 minutes per game, averaging 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists. For a shooting guard to average 9 rebounds and 20 points, this is a really solid pick for the Warriors, especially with the 19th pick. Like, he could have been a top 10 material with these kind of numbers that he averaged, and he is quite efficient at the 3-point line, averaging 44, or not averaging 40. He's a 44% 3-point shooter, and I mean, that's really solid numbers. So I'm really excited to see what we get out of this guy. He looks very promising. Next up with the 20th pick, we see one of the most surprising picks from the Rockets, where they draft small forward Cam Whitmore from Villanova. And I mean, obviously, Cam Whitmore is a great player. He did great in college. And that's not why it's surprising. It's surprising because he fell down so far. He fell down to the 20th when people had him going 4th or 5th. So honestly, for him to go to the 20th pick is quite crazy. But I mean, I guess they were saying that he had like bad interviews with like teams like individually, but he was doing really good in like the group workouts or whatever. So I don't know what was going on with that. But at Villanova, he was averaging 12.5 points, 5 rebounds, and an assist a game. And this Rockets team, their first round draft picks, they got Ahmed Thompson and they got Cam Whitmore. So 2 great picks for this team. Hopefully they said that Cam Whitmore also had something to do with an injury or something possibly. So hopefully it all works out for them. And hopefully Cam Whitmore can get some solid minutes off the bench for this really young Rockets team. I mean, the Rockets have a great young team, and they just need those players to develop, obviously. I expect the Rockets to lose at least 3 of their young players just because they're going to want too much money and they're not going to be able to get paid because of the salary cap. So I do expect this Houston Rockets team to lose a couple of these players, but most of them should stay, and that's really good because they have some talent on this team, to be honest. With the 21st pick, the Nets pick up power forward Noah Clowney. And, obviously this is a team that could really use a power forward. I mean, they have Dorian Finney-Smith, who he can play some defense. He's a decent player. I'm not saying he's bad by any means, but Noah Clowney from Alabama does look like he could contribute quite a bit for this Nets team. He's averaging 10 points in his 1 year of college at Alabama, 8 rebounds and an assist per game. So some pretty decent numbers. And obviously, like I said, this is a team that they need power forward to try to replace Dorian Finney-Smith and maybe put him on the bench. I'm not saying that he shouldn't get any minutes at all, but he's definitely not a great starter to have. But he could definitely run some minutes off your bench. And looking at the depth chart as of right now, that looks like they're gonna end up running Noah Clowney as their backup center, which he is he's 6'10", so pretty decent size. You could definitely work with that at the center position, but I think eventually, if he can prove himself, he'll move up to that starting lineup. And the Nets did have back-to-back picks, so they did get the 21st and 22nd pick, and their 22nd pick was a shooting guard, and they picked up Dariq Whitehead out of Duke. And so this is another Duke player that we've seen go in the first round. We've seen Derek Lively go earlier. So Dariq Whitehead is a 6'7" guard, and he played for Duke. Like I just said, he played for Duke, and he averaged 8 points, 2.5 rebounds, and an assist per game. So he had some decent numbers, and as of right now, it looks like he may get minutes, but it's possible that he will not get minutes this year, and that they'll just let him develop a little bit in practice over the summer and stuff. So we'll see where Dariq Whitehead goes with this Nets team. For a shooting guard at 6'7", that's a pretty good height, I'd say. And not a terrible pick for this Nets team. Next up, we see the Blazers get the 23rd pick, and this is going to be their second pick in the draft. They picked Scoot Henderson with their first pick. Obviously, great pick. But with their 23rd pick, they picked power forward Kris Murray. And, they've got Jeremy Grant, and this power forward Kris Murray, he is he's out of Iowa, sorry. Kris Murray's out of Iowa. He was a 3-year college player. He played his first season when he was 20, so he's another one of the older players coming out of this draft class. But In his third season, he did phenomenal, averaging 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 assists a game. So maybe he can continue those great, like the great numbers and play some solid backup power forward maybe for Jeremy Grant. This is another really young team, I'd say. I mean, they've got Anthony Simons and Shaedon Sharpe. Jeremy Grant is still pretty young. They picked up Scoot Henderson in the draft, who's pretty young. They have Nazir Little, who's pretty young. And obviously they now have Chris Murray, who's pretty young. So, I mean, you have some decent players that are young that are definitely going to develop into even better players than they already are. And that's the most exciting part about drafting. You're going to get more out of the players. And I think Chris Murray is one of those players that he's going to take just a little bit to develop, and he's going to be a solid player for you. Our 24th pick in the draft was made by the Kings, who drafted power forward Olivier Maxence Prosper, and he is out of Marquette, and he was traded to the Mavs. So the Mavs do have this Olivier Maxence Prosper, and in their depth chart, it doesn't look like he's going to be getting many minutes, if he gets any at all. But at Marquette, he played 2 seasons. He played his 2 last seasons at Marquette, and his first season was with Clemson. He went into college at 18, so his last season he was 20, so now he is 20, and he is about to turn 21 tomorrow. At the time I'm recording this video, tomorrow. So the day this video comes out, he will be turning 21, or maybe the day after. But anyways, his birthday's coming up soon. That's what I'm trying to say. And in those 3 years, put up some decent numbers. He put up some okay numbers, I'd say. His first season, he had 2.5 points per game, 2 total rebounds per game, and no assists. And in his second season, he averaged nearly 7 points per game, 3 rebounds, and an assist per game. And then in his third season, he averaged 12.5 points per game, 5 total rebounds per game, and 1 assist per game. So, pretty solid numbers. I mean, obviously, he is later into the draft. He's the 24th pick. So you're not always going to do, not every player in the first round is going to be a great pick. But that's that's the point of developing and developing these players into better players. Next up, with the 25th pick, the Grizzlies drafted point guard Marcus Sasser, and he was traded to the Pistons, but he is out of Houston. So he went to Houston for college, and he was drafted by the Grizzlies and then traded to the Pistons. So for this Detroit team, on their depth chart, he is their 4th point guard, so he probably won't be getting any minutes. But that's okay, because I mean, obviously he's gonna have a while. He can definitely prove himself in practices and stuff like that. But he's another older player coming into the league. He's 22. He's 22, and like I said, out of Houston. And in his most recent season, he averaged 17 points per game, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists. So some pretty solid numbers there at Houston, and he could definitely be a good prospect for this Pistons team. Our next pick, our 26th pick, belonged to the Pacers, and they drafted shooting guard Ben Shepherd out of Belmont, and he's a 6'6" shooting guard, and at Belmont he played 4 years going into his freshman college year at the age of 18. So this last season he was 21. He still is 21, and his birthday's coming up, so he's about to be 22. And what the Pacers are getting out of this player is a pretty solid shooter, 3-point shooter. He in his most recent season at Belmont, he averaged 42% shooting, and that's pretty solid. I mean, 48% field goal percentage, and he was averaging 19 points, 5 total rebounds, and 3 assists per game. So he looks like a great player, and he should definitely be pretty good for this Pacers team, who obviously was in their rebuilding stage, and now they have quite a bit of good players, so it's going to be hard for him to get minutes, especially at his position, because they have players who are also young that they've already had experience with, like Chris Duarte at their shooting guard. They have Benedict Mathurin. So they have multiple good shooting guards that they could use over Ben Shepherd, and that could definitely affect how much playing time he gets. Obviously, it's going to affect how much playing time he gets. So we'll see what happens with him. Maybe he'll end up going to a new team within the next couple of years. But I definitely don't want to see talent like this go to waste. Before we get to the 27th pick, I just want to say sorry about the background noise. I just realized that it was in there, and it was my fan that I have on my desk, so sorry about that. But for our 27th pick, we do have the Hornets, and they drafted point guard Nick Smith Jr. out of Arkansas, and the Hornets are a team that has LaMelo Ball, obviously, and he is a point guard that often gets hurt. So you need a solid backup option for LaMelo Ball. And I mean, they had Terry Rozier, who it looks like they're going to play at their backup point guard, but they definitely need somebody who can run that point guard position. And I mean, obviously they could play Terry Rozier at the starting one if LaMelo Ball gets hurt, but then you're still going to need another backup option. I mean, they had Teo Maledon, they have Kobe Simons, James Bouknight, but Nick Smith Jr. looks like a really solid option. I mean, he was averaging 12.5 points per game, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists per game at Arkansas in his one season that he played there. So, I mean, he could definitely develop, and even if they don't give him minutes this year, he can probably develop over the summer and be a solid player off the bench for them next year. At the 28th pick, the Utah Jazz got another pick, and they drafted small forward Bryce Sensabaugh, and Bryce is out of Ohio State. And at Ohio State, he was averaging 16 points, 5.5 rebounds, and an assist per game. So this 6'6" 6'6" small forward, could definitely be a solid player off the bench or potentially even starting. I mean, you could run him at small forward, but his main position is small, or you could run him at shooting guard, but his main position is small forward. And I think within the next couple of years, we could definitely see this Bryce Sensabaugh starting. And he's definitely not a player to sleep on. He looks like he's going to be a really solid player, and he's definitely somebody to be excited about. He has some pretty good 3-point shooting, 41%, pretty decent. And like I said, definitely somebody to be excited about if you are a Jazz fan. With the 29th pick, the Pacers decided to draft small forward Julian Strawther out of Gonzaga, who they did trade to the defending champions, the Denver Nuggets. And, obviously the Denver Nuggets don't really, they're coming off of a championship. What do they really need? You know what I mean? Like, obviously you still have to maintain that championship team, which they did lose a key piece to. But they're still going to be pretty solid. But Julian Strawther is a 3-year Gonzaga player. And again, definitely not a player to be upset about drafting. He averaged 15 points, 6 rebounds, and assists per game. And again, another pretty solid 3-point shooter, 41% from the 3-point line. So a pretty solid shooter for this Denver Nuggets team, which obviously they have players like Jamal Murray who can shoot, but Julian Strawther looks like he's going to be their backup power forward. Obviously he's a small forward, but at his 6'7" build, he could play he could play power forward if you need him to. So coming off that bench at power forward is a pretty good option for this Nuggets team. And this is another situation where you have a big man that can shoot, and again, that's a really rare thing to have in the NBA. So I really like this pick for the Denver Nuggets, and definitely shouldn't be sleeping on Julian Strawther. With the final pick in the draft, or with the final first round pick in the draft, 30th pick, the Clippers, it belonged to the Clippers, and they drafted power forward Kobe Brown out of Missouri. And this is our second Kobe that we've seen drafted in this draft class. We've seen Kobe Buchanan, and now we see Kobe Brown go number 30. And he's a 6'7" power forward. He was a 4-year player at Missouri. And in his last year at Missouri, he averaged 16 points, 6.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists. And again, we see another solid 3-point shooter averaging 46% from the 3-point line. So at the end of this draft, we did see a couple solid 3-point shooters. And for the Clippers, they have Nick Batum and Marcus Morris Sr. So they could definitely use some help at their power forward position. So I do really like this pick for the Clippers. But like I said, it was a 4-year player, so he's already 23, and this is definitely, even with his older age, this is definitely still a good pick for the Clippers, because like I said, he's a big, he can shoot, and he put up solid numbers at Missouri. So I do, again, really like this pick for the Clippers. That's going to be it for today's episode. If you enjoyed, hit the like button and subscribe. And next week, I'm going to have another exciting episode for you guys. We're going to be talking about the moves made in free agency and the recent trades that took place. We've seen a lot of interesting trades, but I don't want to spoil too much for the next episode, so you'll just have to go watch next Sunday here on the Hoops and Stuff podcast to see what we talk about there. And yeah, I'll see you guys there.